Thank you, all of my one or two or three possible listeners or followers out there on the internet. Welcome to another episode of Let's Ask Paul, the podcast where I answer all of your electrical questions submitted to me through paulabernathy.com, the Let's Ask Paul portal. It's a simple process. You simply go to paulabernathy.com, put in your name, email address, and put in your question. If it's a follow-up to a previous episode, just put what episode you're following up your question to, and I will answer via email or, if selected, in a podcast. So much like today's podcast, they are available on all of your popular listening platforms. So wherever you like to listen to your podcasts, and there was a day where I was like, everything's going to go video, and everybody loves video, but there's still this passion that people have out there for podcasts. Whether you I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to web design podcasts. I listen to search engine optimization podcasts. I listen to all different types of podcasts, and I listen to on my Alexa devices, but also I stream them through my phone to my Bluetooth speakers, all different things. We're available on all the popular podcast platforms, whether it's Spreaker, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Deezer, iHeartRadio, whatever you want to listen. But you also can listen to all of our podcasts as well over on our YouTube channel. Probably not popular with YouTube because they want to be a video platform, obviously. But we do share our podcasts and select videos over on YouTube. None of our exclusive videos are over there anymore. They're all on our monthly or annual subscription program over on our website, which brings me to our website. If you want to learn the National Electrical Code, we have a program that's designed to spoon feed you the National Electrical Code to make you more well-rounded in understanding the NEC. And this is, again, a complicated document. And I give of myself on Wednesday nights to help students in the Fast Tracks program to bring their questions, anything that they find confusing, maybe something they've talked about at the water cooler they want to get clarity on. That's what I use Wednesday nights for. It's exclusive to Fast Tracks members. If you're interested in joining our program and you want to join us, just simply go over to electricalcodeacademy.com.net or .org. Again, electricalcodeacademy.com.net or .org, whichever one you want. All roads lead back to our websites. And you can always know that it's our website because if it's not that URL, up in the search bar, it'll have my name in there somewhere. So you'll know it's connected to us, whether it's one of my subdomains or it's our primary domain. Rest assured, it all leads back to me. But if you want to learn the NEC at a little higher level and get more proficient on the job, even if you're not preparing for an exam, check it out. Now, if you want to learn residential codes, then our residential red is a great place to be. If you want to learn commercial codes, very hyper-focused on the commercial electrical codes when it comes to electrical, that's going to be our green program. If you really want to get immersed in grounding and bonding and become that grounding and bonding guru, then you want to look at our purple program, which is dealing with the grounding and bonding, and that's a great course as well. So check those out over on our website. Okay, let's get into today's episode. Now, we're continuing on with questions that, for some reason, I've compiled these together because I got them at different times. But since I'm in this mode of talking about PV or talking about interconnected electric power production sources, and I've done a couple of the Let's Ask Paul on that, answering some questions. We got a question today, and I don't anticipate this finally, right, to not be a long podcast, right? Yeah, that's why I say that a lot. But this one shouldn't be too long because the simple question that was submitted says, Paul, can you please explain the difference between an AC coupled PV system and a DC coupled PV system? Thanks in advance, a loyal listener. Okay, thank you very much, loyal listener. I appreciate you doing so. Okay, I guess the first thing that I'm going to try to keep it at a very high level here is explaining the different systems and what we're talking about. When you're talking about a DC or AC coupled system, we're talking about multi-mode systems. And you have what's called multi-mode inverters. This multi-mode inverter is going to have potentially like a PV array coming in, but it's also going to have energy storage that gets into the system. So we have multiple modes. So we're not only maybe going to be supplying a backup load panel because we are doing energy storage. If we were just kicking it back to the utility, then that would be simply an interactive inverter. And it's just, that's all it does. It basically sends you current back to the actual grid, okay? And try to offset your consumption, which again is another thing that's misconceptions to people when it comes to that. When you have an inverter, even if you have a interactive inverter, there's a certain amount of power that can come out of that in its output rating in amps. And that can be kicked back to your system. Now, if you have no way of storing this power, then all you're basically trying to do at this point is offset what you're using, your consumption. So if you're in a high consumption area, let's say my house, and I'm doing $300 a month in my utility bill, and I add in a PV system here, and I put an inverter, so I have DC output coming into my inverter, and I'm supplying it to my trying to counteract, or not counteract, I'm trying to spin my meter in the other direction so that I save money or possibly make money. Well, that's going to be great unless you're in a really non-efficient dwelling, whereas you're going to be using more than you create because you're only going to get so much. It doesn't matter what size PV array you have, and most people that design these things are very good at this. But it doesn't matter what your PV array can put out if it bottlenecks at your inverter, because the inverter is only going to put out a certain amount. And when it converts it from, or I should say inverts it from DC to AC, then you're going to be only being able to use the amount of energy that can be produced by as it goes through that bottleneck, which is that inverter, right? Of course, you can go bigger inverters. They get much more expensive, but the typical residential, maybe something like a 5 kW system, and you can get an inverter that's 5 kW. You can then get inverters that probably are less. And again, you're only going to get out of that inverter what it's rated for. Okay, that's another thing that people need to be aware of. Now, when you're dealing with a PV system, if I'm spending $300 a month in my electric bill, which is high, and that is probably close to what I spend here in Texas, the only advantage I'm going to get of that PV system is to offset that. So if I'm doing $300 a month of consumption, and I'm able to generate some to offset that, it will lower what I pay per month. Now, the only way that I'm going to break even or start making money is if I'm producing more than I consume. And if you have a really, really energy efficient house, I mean, foamed ceilings, foamed attic, 16 SEER, very efficient in its cooling and heating, and everything is taken into consideration, very efficient, then it's quite possible that you could break even or even make money. Now, the funny part about this, and again, I know the PV guys are going to jump all over me. If I'm consuming $100 a month of my bill, right? $100 a month of my bill, and I'm producing $200 worth back to the grid. You follow me? I'm trying to do some basic math here. Then I'm going to be $100 to the good. And that makes people feel really good, right? I'm making money. But $100 times 12 months is $1,200 a year. If my PV system costs me $80,000, and again, I'm not here to get with the sales folks. I can't, I don't know the current costs of systems and what the credits are. I don't know that. So I can't comment on that. But what I can tell you is if I put in a PV system and it costs me $50,000, I mean, after credits, I'm just throwing a number out there. I have no rhyme or reason here. And it costs me $50,000. If I'm $100 to the good a year, that's $1,200 a year. If I take that $50,000 and I divide that by 1,200, it's going to take me a long freaking time to break even. So if you have a situation where you can get a really good deal, really good prices, they work you up, get whatever they tell you they can give you in writing, they analyze your consumption, you have an energy efficient house, I can see where it could make sense, provided you get your PV system costs as low as possible. Now, there was a time when this wasn't the case. Components were very expensive and whatnot, so it didn't make sense. And this is why those of us that are around, remember in the 70s and early 80s, the PV market started to drop off. It wasn't really cost effective, right? Now, you might get some really good rates now on the buyback from your utilities, but again, it a lot has to do with your consumption. So I just want to set that there so people understand it, that it's not that I'm a downer of PV. And the reason I had to do that in this episode is because there's people that say, Paul, you're just a hater on EVs, electric vehicles, and you're just a hater on PV. I'm not a hater on PV. You take the house that I'm building now that's going to house my studio. If you think about that, that's an ultra energy efficient house. It's been calculated out that it's probably even, it's over 3,000 square feet, but even because of how it's sealed and how it's done, that you're looking at $100 to $120 a month electric bill. Well, that's 50% less than what I got now. Now, if you put a PV on there, and it's a very efficient PV, and again, remembering that you've got that irradiance period, which you're going to get your peak, which you're going to produce the best. You're not going to be producing at night. You're not going to be, very little unless the moon is ultra bright. The consumption is really during the day. The production is really during the day. So if you don't have a storage system, then it's not as efficient as it could be, because if you had a storage system, ESS system like Tesla walls or power packs, then you could store that energy and, you'd be able to take advantage of that storage situation and probably come out in good position, except for the fact that stuff raises the cost extremely high for the batteries and all that kind of stuff, right? So if you're just doing a PV in a house that would be ultra efficient and you're consuming $125, but you're producing $225, then you're making $100 a month from your utility. You can say you're getting free utility, right? The problem I have with it is, and you do the long-term math, unless I can get that system at a very cheap, low price, then they're going to have to show me where my break-even point would be. And I have people that tell people, oh, it's 10 years. Oh, it's 8 years. Okay. Well, make them put that in writing. Although, again, going after somebody at a later date is really pointless because I don't think you can get anything out of it. But again, making promises like that, again, but if you have a house that's not efficient, then don't look for solar to benefit you. That's just what I'm saying. Okay, enough of that. I just felt I had to say it. Back to the original question. And again, y'all know I do this. I can go off on a tangent. All right, DC coupled multi-mode system is what you really are asking versus AC coupled multi-mode system. So with the DC system, everything interconnected. So think of multi-mode means you have multiple sources of potential power, right? So you have energy storage systems like batteries, Tesla walls, but you also have the PV system going into a multi-mode, right? And so not only is it interacting with the utility, okay, so you'll be dealing with that, but also it can supply backup loads in a backup load panel. So when the PV's running and everything's great, the sun is bright, you've got the certain output of your inverter and certain number of amps can supply these backup panel loads. Not a problem. And still can kick it back to the grid when you have excess power. But then when you're not, and you're on the energy storage, that can also kick into the system, right? And that's real important because people also want to say all the time, well, what do I do when I lose power? Well, In an interactive inverter, when you lose power, it shuts down, right? Because you're not kicking anything back to the grid, it power shuts down. We don't want to kick, if there's a storm, we don't want to kick anything back on the grid. You got the utility workers that are working on it. We don't want them to be surprised by anything, so it shuts down. That's how the interactive inverter works. So in a multi-mode inverter, it's the same concept. It will not kick power back when it loses power, but if you have energy storage as multi-modes, it can also supply a backup load panel. So you could have other loads that are being backed up. So basically, for lack of a better understanding, like what you would do with the generator. Now remember, it's just not endless power, right? You're based on your limitations of the arrays. You're based on your limitations of your energy storage. Of course, you could buy a lot of batteries. You could really bundle that system up. But again, you're going to also be limited to your inverter's output. So it doesn't behoove you to go so big on your storage and your arrays and everything like that, only to have it bottleneck at your inverter. So that's why it really pays to have people that know what they're doing really sizing this system if you're going to do that. Okay. So it's another reason why I don't tell people that just does solar arrays that, again, as I said at the beginning, to payoff point, if they're small like microinverters and you're only backfeeding 20 amp devices and your panel and all that, how much can it really do for you if you have a high consumption household? Now, if you have a very efficient house, like I said, then it might be something. And those can be slightly less in cost than the old traditional systems with the big old inverter. But at the end of the day, hopefully somebody will do an analysis for you and you'll be able to make your decision based on that. But again, I just remind you, think long term, think payback, and get what they say they're going to give you in writing and read all the fine print. Okay, so I keep getting away from the topic. So a DC coupled multi-mode system is all of the connections between the sources, whether it's an ESS or it's a PV array, all of that is made on the DC side of the multi-mode inverter. It's all made there. Now, the advantages to that is that even if you had an inverter that's, say, 4 kW, but you had an array that produced way more than that, then since it's also can charge the batteries on the DC side, you have no losses there. Whereas if you have to go from DC to AC and then convert it back to DC in order to charge batteries in your storage system, then you've got some losses there, right? But on a DC coupled system, everything is on the DC side. So you might oversize your array to help charge your energy storage, your batteries or whatnot, more efficiently, right? Okay, so the easiest way to remember, so a DC coupled system on a multi-mode system is that takes place on the DC side, right? Now, an AC system, the same concept takes place, but it does it over on the AC side. So everything takes place interacting these two systems all take place on the AC side of this equation. Now, typically with the DC coupled system, if you have a PV array or you have an energy storage, all that's done on the DC side, you might just have a multi-mode inverter and you're done with it, right? It's designed to connect to the interactive system to the utility, right? It's also designed to use the energy storage and everything in order to supply a backup load panel, okay? When it comes to the AC, same concept, but everything's being done on the load side or the output side of your inverters, right? And typically, you would have 2 inverters when you do this, right? Because you're doing it on the AC side. So you're going to have to still have your interactive inverter for your AC system, right? And you're going to have your disconnects, your PV disconnects as you normally would, and you're going to be supplying this backup load center. But then you have a multi-mode inverter, which is going to allow you to go back and charge those batteries. And of course, you'll have a charger on there that keeps it charge controller so you don't overcharge these batteries into the system. It might be built into the multi-mode inverter. I doubt it, but there's so many of them out there today that manufacturers that they could integrate all that. And then you would go from the interactive inverter for the PV through the backup load center, okay? Because you're going to have AC loads there. And then you will have the energy storage from the multi-mode inverter also supplying that backup panel, right? And then out of the multi-mode inverter, that's going to be connected to the interactive system back to the utility, okay, through the panel, the main panel. So depending on the system you're dealing with, you might have multiple inverters or you might have one inverter, okay, in this scenario. Now, there's many ways to design these systems. That's just, one way. There's other ways to do that. But the most simplest system is from your PV array down to an interactive inverter into your panel. Of course, you have a PV disconnect and all that kind of good stuff. But anyway, it's simply converting DC to AC. Boom, in your panel, boom, you're done. And your hope that is you produce more than you consume. And if it's done, then that allows your meter to, in a sense, roll back and you are not paying anything and potentially earning something. But remember, you still have to pay back your return on investment, right? You still have to pay back the original cost of your system, okay? All right, so hopefully that explains it to you. Just think of it in your mind. In your mind, picture DC coupled system, all of the interaction between the sources like the energy storage and the PV, not the utility. All of those other sources are being done or interconnected or being done on the DC side, okay? And then for an AC coupled system, all of those systems are being interconnected, but on the output side of the inverters, okay? That's being done on the AC side. Once it's already been inverted into AC current, then you do the interconnections there, right? So that's the easiest way to think about it without any images to be able to show you this. Just think, you hear DC coupled systems, all of them are coupled together on the DC side. AC coupled systems, everything is taking place on the AC side. That's the difference between a DC coupled system with a multi-mode inverter. And think multi-mode inverter is that. It's just allowing for multiple modes. Not only is it allowed to be able to supply a load center backup panel for loads, kind of like what we do in a generator, same kind of concept, but also the ability to supply power back to the grid in order to spin that meter in the opposite direction. And remember that if you lose the grid, it shuts off the interactive component, but yet it multi-mode, it doesn't shut off the ability to still supply power to a backup panel, okay? So it's all in how you design the system, and I just want you to kind of understand that we can't cover all of that in this episode, but that's typically the differences between an AC coupled multi-mode system and a DC coupled multi-mode system. It has a lot to do with a multi-mode inverter. On an AC system, you're probably going to have an interactive inverter and a multi-mode inverter. And in a DC system, you're probably just going to have a multi-mode inverter, and it's going to be able to do both, that type of thing. Okay? All right. That's going to be it for this episode. Hopefully that explained a little bit about the AC to DC coupled multi-mode systems and AC and DC, either one. If you have any additional questions, just reference this episode. And I believe this episode is 88. In a follow-up question, I will do my best to try to answer that for you. Again, I will tell people all the time, I am not the definitive expert when it comes to PV systems. I teach the code involved in it, but there are experts out there, Ryan Mayfield, Bill Brooks, John Wiles. Those individuals are the experts. That is what they do day in and day out. Not us code guys that dabble in it because it's in the NEC. These folks live it, design it every day. That is your definitive expert. Okay. All right, folks. Till next time, folks, stay safe. God bless. And again, thanks for joining me on this podcast. Listen to all of our other podcasts, Master the NEC podcast on all your favorite listening platforms. Till next time, God bless.